So let's start by introducing yourself to everybody. Tell us a little bit about who you are, and then we'll start.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me. So, Matt Fisher, obviously, that goes without saying. I think you can see my name's there. I currently live on the Wirral Peninsula, not far from Liverpool, having grown up and spent the sort of first two decades or so of my life in Chester. I am the son of a school teacher, well, school teachers, and have, to my delight, 4 sisters, no brothers. So that was fun growing up with 4 sisters. When I think there was at one point actually when before mum and dad did some work on the house, where I was in a small bedroom with three of my sisters during my teenage years.
There is a bonus to that, though, right? Because you can chase all their friends.
There is a side benefit, yes.
Yeah.
Side benefit, definitely. There was definitely lots of girls around the house all the time.
Right, which is nice for a teenage young man growing up.
Definitely. So I, from a young age, everybody in our family really has been incredibly sporty. So we all grew up competing, swimming, athletics, things like that. I continued that on into my sort of GCSE final years of high school, and was granted an exception to study part-time, to finish my GCSEs part-time, because at that point I'd been selected to represent the UK at triathlon. Now, at the time, triathlon wasn't a particularly well-known sport. It wasn't in the mainstream. It wasn't overly televised like it is now. But it was still a huge achievement and honour to be selected to represent the country in triathlon, and to essentially have that being my first vocation. Threw myself into sport. As far as I was concerned, as a relatively immature young man, sort of 15, 16 years of age, that was all I was ever going to do. I didn't need to focus in school, didn't need to pay attention, because I was going to be running up, all my life. I didn't need to have A levels in maths and English and science and everything. Mm-hmm. So didn't put a lot of emphasis on my education. I continued to compete on a national level and an international level for triathlon. I also branched into an even smaller known sport called biathlete. So obviously triathlon is let me get the order right now. It's swim, bike, run. Biathlete is run, swim, run. And then you have other sports. They all form part of a wider pentathlon. There's the group pentathlon. They all form part of the wider that. And then there's derivatives of it. You've got biathlete, triathlon, biathlon, aquathon, all of these different types of variations. And it's basically a different variation of what sports they use in what order.
Okay.
So I also then branched out into biathlete, which was even less well known than triathlon, but was really fortunate in being selected to represent the UK at world stage on 2 separate occasions. My best result, I think it came in Germany, where I managed to rank 4th in the world finals. However, when I'm trying to give myself a bit of a confidence boost, I tell myself that I was the youngest when I competed. So I try and convince myself that technically speaking, I was, on the day I was the best. That helps sometimes when when I'm feeling a bit down. So competed across a number of those sports for a number of years until unfortunately I was cycling in Swansea as part of the peloton. The arrow sort of formation that you see the cyclists going out that go incredible speeds. This was with part of the Sport England and England Triathlon camp. So we used to go away. So you've probably heard of the Brownlee brothers.
Yes.
So the Brownlee brothers and I and a few others, James, Simon, a few of the others, used to go away and have camps. We would go and stay over, for example, in Loughborough University, and we'd work out and we'd train for a week at a time, and we'd come home, do our own things, and then go back and do regular camps. So we were off on one of those camps in Swansea, and we were going down a 40-degree decline. You can imagine, the professional athletes all in a peloton. It's not a team sport, triathlon. It's an individual sport, but you have to train as a team. So highly competitive. Nobody takes a training session easy. Everybody's racing every single time we train together. 3-4 times a day, everybody was racing. So this peloton was moving with some pace. I think we were probably doing somewhere around 50 miles an hour, because there was no cars keeping up with us. The weather was pretty atrocious. It was sheet rain. We were struggling to see too much in front of us. At the point where we reached the bottom of this decline, I was in the middle of the peloton. So in the middle of the peloton, you really are only focused on the wheel in front of you. You need to be trying to keep to 2 to 3 inches maybe off the wheel in front of you, so you have complete trust in the person in front of you. Well, maybe not trust, but blind faith maybe.
Yeah.
In front of you, that they are focused on what's in front of them, and they're making sure that the road's clear ahead. Unfortunately, visibility was very, very poor. We reached a very sharp turn at the end of this decline, but nobody really saw it too far in advance because of the visibility. Accumulation, it's not the right word, an accumulation of challenging situations appeared. And as the people at the front of the peloton turned, they spotted a patch of oil on the floor. The peloton broke and went around it. I was in the middle of it. I hit the patch of oil, lost control of my bike, and then this is where it gets quite comical when you describe it afterwards. I went through the road. The road turned off, whereas I just went straight. I impacted on a sort of waist-high brick wall, a boundary wall from a house, because there was a house at the bottom of the corner. My bike crumpled into the wall. I shot off it. I hit next to a window. Bless the poor woman that was in there that got the fright of her life, seeing this skinny teenager in lycra flying towards her window. I hit the window about 20-25 feet up in the air, and then landed on my shoulder and my neck. I lost consciousness, came to, lost consciousness again. And then the next thing I remember was being picked up by the recovery car that we had behind us all, being obviously told that I was being taken to hospital. I'd had a bit of a bike accident. And I remember that pretty well, because it was the best way to get there, or what I was told at the time, was the sort of the back roads. Whereas a lot of these back roads had cattle grids. And what we didn't know at the time was that my scapula, my shoulder blade, was in a number of pieces. That had taken the brunt of the impact. So every time we went over a cattle grid, the bones in my shoulder were just rubbing in against each other, which didn't make for a pleasant journey to the hospital. Cut forward, recovery was slow, and painful, but I did manage to recover, to 98, 99%. What I struggled to recover from, though, was the fear on the bike. Okay. I spent a lot of time at the velodrome with Sir Chris Hoy's trainer at the time, trying to get my confidence up in the Manchester velodrome, to be comfortable enough or confident enough to take those risks again on the bike. You see when you watch the triathletes and the cyclists, you see that they lean into the corners, don't they, like a motorbike, like riders. And I had a block. I had a block that I really struggled to overcome, where I was fine on the bike, I could go fast, but if there was a corner in front of me, I'd slow down and I'd be apprehensive. I wouldn't want to lean, especially if it was raining. Because these tires that you're racing on are tiny. There's not a lot of room for error, and that was the real block that I struggled to get over. That fear. Back at the time, there wasn't really a great deal of support for the professional triathletes on the GB squad for psychology, psychotherapy, counselling, any of those sort of supports. So didn't get any of that support that maybe would have helped. Maybe wouldn't have done. I'm still the same on the bike today. I'm more confident because I know if I fall off, I'll bounce. But I don't think I'd be flying myself into corners like I would have done still. So unfortunately, that led to sort of the slow decline of my career, if you can call it that. And within sort of 12 months, 24 months, I'd all but retired from the sport because I couldn't perform anymore. Physically, I still had some challenges to get over. I still, if you think swimming is a huge part of triathlon. If you come out at the back of the swim, you've got a lot of work to do on the bike to get back to the front. And swimming was always almost my strongest sport. I used to religiously, I would come out first, and then drop to the back on the bike. But the shoulder, limitation that I had after that crash really impacted my swimming, and that was the start of the sort of the slow decline in my performance. That then takes me on to, I guess, the sort of second stage of my life, where I found myself sitting there going, what do I do now? I was always going to be a triathlete. I was always going to be a professional athlete of some sort. I'd operated at world level. I'd demonstrated myself across multiple disciplines. I knew I had it in me, but all of a sudden, physically, I couldn't perform like I used to be able to anymore.
How old are you at this point?
At this point, I will have been 17, 18, I think.
So you went through all that before you'd even turned 18?
Yep.
So wow. So you've effectively lost a career, suffered massive physical injuries, psychological injuries, and then you sat there as a 17, 18-year-old now trying to figure out how to pick up your life when it hasn't really even begun.
What's next? Yeah, because remembering back to high school, I went part-time and I did not really pay any attention.
Did you get your GCSEs?
I did, yes. I got my 5 GCSEs, and I got sort of middle of the ground marks. I certainly didn't have a passion for learning at the time. As far as I was concerned, as a young man, it was stopping me from doing what I was going to be doing. Education was getting in the way of my sport. And now I found myself, I've got to get a real job now. Okay. I've got to get a real job and do something. Actually, I don't really know what I want to do, and I don't know whether I can do it because I don't, have perhaps the best education history because of my efforts that I put into it. So I went to, I found a job that I guess I could do with minimal education. I went into lifeguarding, swimming teaching, did a few other sort of sports coaching jobs, basketball coaching, football coaching, rugby coaching, just all of these type things. Worked in several schools, worked in some private groups as well, and started to recognise that one of the things that makes me tick is helping others and protecting others.
Okay.
And that got me to apply for my SIA, my security license, which led to me working security and working on the doors across Chester, Manchester, Liverpool, Northwich, a variety of places. which I enjoyed at the time. I enjoyed feeling like I was helping people that needed help. Unfortunately, there were circumstances where people were being victimized, picked on, assaulted, and it was my job, or so I thought it was anyway. It was my job to go and stop them and help. So
What
I
year
enjoyed
was,
doing it. Sorry.
what year was this?
Oh gosh, what year will this have been? This will have been probably about 2008 to 2012.
Yeah. So the SIA was relatively new then, wasn't it? It came in around 2006, 2005, because that's when I was doing that job, and it was pretty horrendous. As a professional security person, you just felt, I don't know if you experienced the same, but unbelievably victimized.
Oh yeah.
Be the nicest person in the world, the most professional person in the world, talk your way out of anything, but inevitably end up in some sort of physical situation. And you would always be, no matter what the situation, you'd always be the one who ended up in trouble. And yeah, it was a pretty brutal time back then. And I get it because from what I understand, the SIA were trying to get rid of all of the stereotypical doorman, right? So the steroids and the tattoos and the bullies and the thugs who used to prey on people. I get that. But it was a brutal time, man, when you're just trying to earn a few quid and you're trying to be a professional. And like you say, protect people, look after people, do a job as a professional.
With minimal training as well. Back then the SIA was conflict resolution. If you could stand in a classroom and try and talk somebody down, and paper-based exercises, that was it. You didn't actually have to know how to look after yourself. So yeah, there were days, there were scary days. I used to find myself a lot as well because, as you said, it was still fairly new, and there was still a lot of the old guard, you know, um, people around. I used to find myself picked out quite often by the bullies that want to come in and use the venues, because when you've got a lineup of, let's say, 3 or 4 doormen in a venue protecting the place, and there's me, 5'9", not too big, and then you've got the 6'4" giant bodybuilders.
Yeah,
Naturally, the ones that want to pick on somebody and do their bullying, pick on the one that they think they're going to win against.
yeah, of
So
course.
I used to find myself scrapping a lot because people would come in and be like, "Well, let's cause some trouble tonight. Well, I'm going to go and pick on that little guy because he's half the size of everybody else."
Yeah,
I don't. I sort of see myself now as in like sort of phase 3 of my life. That was phase 2 when I was working the doors. And since then I've thankfully met my wife, had kids and stuff. So we don't reminisce. We don't sort of talk about the time overly before we met and things. And I mean, we were together whilst whilst I was working the doors. But it's not a topic of conversation you explore. You know,
yeah,
so it doesn't come up very often. But there are some horrendous things that have been seen, uh, witnessed, and been involved in. From we had the armed police called out to a venue in Chester because um, a guy came to the door, was clearly too drunk to come in. So we sent him on his way, and he said he was going to come back with his boys. Really fairly standard threat. What we didn't realise at the time was that when he said his boys, he meant his machetes. Um, so he came back with his machetes. Thankfully, we saw it in time and managed to lock the door and call the police, who the armed police came out and ended up taking him away. But yeah, there's some scary situations happened.
yeah. So what happened from there then? What happened from
So,
there?
well, this is where the story gets interesting. Fast forward to 2012. I was at the point in my life where I wanted to do something different. I knew I wasn't gonna, or I knew I didn't want to just be a doorman and a security guard for the rest of my life. So I decided I want to go back to university. Well, not back to university, to go to university. But no university would accept me with the lack of A levels and on my sporting prowess. Not many universities wanted to accept me on that basis. So I was in a period of 6, 12 months where I wanted to get out, but I couldn't, and I couldn't take the time unpaid. I had a mortgage at this point. Me and my wife were saving up to get married, so we needed the income. We couldn't stop the income to go to university, and it was a difficult, position to be in where what's going to solve it, but you're blocked from doing so. Fortunately, I guess I can say that now. At the time, in January 2012, I contracted a neurological disease called transverse myelitis, which is a cousin disease to MS.
Okay.
I was at work one day. I think I was doing security for a government building, I think at the time in Liverpool. No, it wasn't in Liverpool. Sorry, it was in Manchester, because I remember I went to Stockport Hospital. I started getting pins and needles in my feet, in my left foot, and that grew and grew up to my knee. And I got up, walked around, thinking maybe I've just sat on something. I was doing a lot of weightlifting at the time. Thought maybe I just pulled something, or maybe there's a bit of swelling and compressing a nerve. That continued to grow up my leg. When it got to sort of my waist, I was a bit like, oh, that's strange, isn't it? And I remember, sort of trying to work out what it could be at the time. But this was before, Google was really a thing that you just had on your phone, and you could self-diagnose. I remember speaking to my wife though at the time, because she is a veterinary surgeon, so infinitely more intelligent and medical than me. And I remember speaking to my wife and sort of saying what's happening. And then over the period of the next sort of half an hour, my right leg started as well, and I was like, yeah, something's not right. I'll go and get it checked out. So I made my way to the closest hospital, which was the Stockport Stepping Hill Hospital. It was at the time, I don't know whether you remember hearing about it, but it was at the time where, unfortunately, it was in the news because they had discovered that I believe it was a nurse, if I remember rightly so, a nurse had been messing around with the saline drips, and it caused a couple of deaths in Stepping Hill Hospital.
Yeah, I do remember that.
And they didn't know at that point who was doing it. And I remember going into the hospital, wheeling myself in from the taxi that I ended up having to take, and going, "Oh God, I hope they just don't give me a saline drip.
Don't give me saline.
Don't put me on a drip." The first thing they did was put me on the drip, which was anxiety inducing at the time. But it was clear at that point that something wasn't right. The numbness, the tingling had progressed to that point where, my waist sort of up to my chest, I couldn't feel at all. Well, I couldn't feel it, but I could feel it. I couldn't feel the sensation. If I was doing that, I couldn't feel it, but it was burning. It was burning with pain, and just the nerve ends were firing away. They were firing away, trying to figure out what was going on. If you pull back all of the layers of the things that your body is supposed to do, or the nerves that are supposed to do, its primary function is to interpret pain as well. Your nerves will tell you when you're in pain. And essentially what had happened is I got a swelling in my upper spine. They don't know exactly what causes it, but the sort of the working assumption was that I had the flu a week before, and something in the flu mutated and caused my immune system to attack my own central nervous system. So my immune system thinks that my nervous system now is a foreign body, and it goes in and it attacks it.
Got it, yeah.
So it does that, and obviously in the process of that, your body floods it with, white blood cells, red blood cells, everything else, and that causes swelling and inflammation. That inflammation blocked the nerve from my chest down. So from that point, it's not like that. But imagine cutting it across. Above it, all works fine because it's driven by your brain, but below it, none of the messages are getting through because it's blocked. There's a roadblock there because of that swelling. Unfortunately, Stepping Hill didn't figure out what was wrong with me, and they, much to the amazement of quite a few people, they discharged me home after I think 2 or 3 weeks with, we don't really know what's going on.
Still tingly and numb after 3 weeks, and they sent you home.
Oh yeah, couldn't feel anything. Yeah,
So you had to be put in a wheelchair, I'm guessing, right, and pushed
yeah,
by someone.
yeah. Couldn't really stand. I could just about support myself on a Zimmer frame because my upper body, and I was strong, but couldn't feel my legs. No, had no reaction. The test that they do on your on knees, elbows, things like that, and it automatically, the reflex test. Thank you. Nothing. It was like knocking with nobody home. But yeah, unfortunately, they discharged me home with, we don't know what's wrong. My dad came and got me from the hospital, took me straight to my local GP. My GP took 5 seconds at most. To this day, I wish I could find him again and pass on my thanks to him. He took 5 seconds, looked at me and said, that's not right. You need to go straight down to Walton, which is obviously the neuro specialist hospital in the northwest in Fazakerley. They took me straight there. Within 24 hours, had diagnosed me with transverse myelitis. Started the steroids, a huge course of steroids to try and get rid of the inflammation. Because the longer that the blood flow, the nerve system, everything has been cut off, the more damage it does. So they started the steroid treatment, which fortunately worked in shrinking the swelling. It was no longer showing up on MRIs that it was active, but I was still, I still wasn't able to walk. I still wasn't able to feel anything. My reflexes weren't doing anything. Now the scary point of that is that there's less than, I think from memory, there's less than one person in 1.3 million people get transverse myelitis. And from what I remember being told at the time, this is 12, 13 years ago almost now, the diagnosis and the sort of the prognosis from them was split into thirds. So a third of people, what they would refer to as walking wounded, they've had it, but then they've got over it. And you might see something, but nothing. You'll never tell that anything's happened to them. Maybe they'll have a slight limp, or maybe their toe will tingle occasionally. A third of people don't recover, and that's that. And a third of people, unfortunately, will not make it out of hospital. That they will pass away from it. The people that they call walking wounded usually bounce back straight away. Within a matter of days, if not a couple of weeks. So the prognosis at that point was very much a case of we don't think you're going to be making much recovery. The likelihood is that you will remain in a wheelchair. You will remain partly paralysed, and that's sort of that, which was terrifying, but at the same time not as terrifying as you'd imagine, because at the time you're in it, right? You just sort of, okay, nothing I can do about it. And I think as well, what helped me was actually focusing more on the impact of other people. So when this happened, it was 6 weeks before me and my wife got married. And bless her, I don't know how she didn't bat an eyelid. One of my sisters, I believe one or two of my sisters actually, we spoke about it years and years later, had said to Ashley, my wife, and said, we would not think any less of you if you decided that this was too much. You're a 22-year-old woman with the rest of your life ahead of you, and now most likely, according to the doctors, will have caring responsibilities with somebody that you've only known for a couple of years. She didn't bat an eyelid. Didn't bat an eyelid at all. This, she was sold. I don't know how I quite did that, but I'm glad I did. And so I spent a couple of weeks in the neuro hospital in Fazakerley in the Walton Centre, getting over the sort of the acute bout of it. And then they transferred me to the neuro rehab unit in Clatterbridge, which thankfully is only down the road from me. Because alongside working full time, planning for a wedding, my wife was also travelling up to Fazakerley, which was an hour each way. So I got moved into the neuro rehabilitation unit, which I think I spent about 2.5, 3 months in there, essentially learning how to do things again. And the best way that I can describe it is if you imagine, if I take you back to the analogy before of the road being blocked,
Yeah.
that road is written off. They'll never use it again. It can't be used. So you need to build a new road. You need to build a new road around it. So you need to train, or your brain needs to create its new neural pathways with the nerves. So your brain needs to figure out how to do things again.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, your brain doesn't. Your brain sends signals to your muscles and everything, but they're not connected anymore. So I spent time learning how to do anything and everything again. From learning to be able to move my fingers, holding pens, trying to throw balls in cups, all of these different type of things, and obviously the more sort of visible, learning to walk again, learning to stand up balanced, and not fall over when I try and move. And that was a really, really challenging thing to do, because if you think about it, very few people have ever actually had to think about how you walk. Obviously, I know you'll fully appreciate to a high degree how complex it is to try and teach yourself to do something. But as a babies, we stumble into it, don't we? We kind of go, oh, if I move that does that, and over time you kind of get to a point where you go, that's how I move that leg in front of me, and then I have to move that one to do it. I remember being in the parallel bars, the ones that you almost like you see the gymnasts in, being supported up, sling around my shoulders, holding up my arms, and the physio behind me saying, "Okay, move your left leg," and I'm there going, "How? How do I do that?" She's like, "Okay, so first you have to tense your quads," and I'm like, "Okay, well I know what my quads are. How do I tense my quads again?" It just doesn't compute. So they help you. They help sort of train you. So I mean, there's several ways they can do it. They can do it with sort of minor electrical impulses to get like a TENS machine, to get that muscle tense and sort of make that connection. That sensation, that is tensing your quads. Right, and then you need to release your quads and tense your calf. Then you need to do, try and tense your glutes, move your left leg, and they break it down into this sort of scientific, process to be able to teach you step by step what muscle after what point to how to teach you what to do. And I think to leave the rehab unit, I think I had to demonstrate that I could walk 10 meters or something like that, basically enough to be able to get around the house, unsupported. Well, I say unsupported, unaided with people. And then I went through a period of maybe 4 years where I was in the wheelchair, using a Zimmer frame and using crutches and using other walking apparatus. Because the other thing which I learned as well is your body is using so much more energy to try and do something that it usually did. So walking to the bathroom would absolutely exhaust me because I'm working so hard. Everything is so tense. It's like you're going at everything 120% effort, and your body is drained from that.
But it's your mind too, isn't it?
Say that again.
It's your mind as well, because, like you said, when you're a baby, you're learning it, and it's almost easier to learn something than to relearn something, I think.
Yeah.
You've got to get rid of all the habits you knew before just to get to the start line before then relearning. But because you're consciously now as an adult, I think as a child, you consciously and subconsciously, you just figure stuff out instinctually, right? But now you're like, right, how do I do this again? I've got to tense the quad, tense the calves. I've got 8 meters to walk. And that brings a little bit of stress with it. And then you just, a lot of the stuff you're saying I can relate to. And you get mental fatigue, and it's very true. we'll get onto this later because I'm really interested to know the answer to this. But I walk around now and I look at people, and I still now think you guys take this for granted so much that you put one foot in front of the other automatically. You're not looking at cameras in the road or the way the road bends this way, that way. It takes you no energy. For me, it's 300 to 500% more energy than an able-bodied person to walk around. So it's like someone sprinting everywhere all day. So I totally get what you're saying, but the physical part of it is just one part. The mental part of it adds to the physical part, and you get to the end of the day, right? And at this period of your life I'm talking to you now, and just going for a pee is like, it's like going back and doing one of your triathlons again. By the end of it, you're like, I'm spent, done.
And then obviously you've also got the associated medication that you're no doubt on. So your brain's a bit fuzzy as well. You're struggling to remember things. You're tired because you're having to take sleeping pills as well because your body's on fire. Yeah,
Right.
you've described it really well. Then reminded me that when I first started to go out walking again, obviously my wife would be by my side, and initially we found it quite complicated to understand. Actually, I can't talk while I'm doing it.
I say this now. I still say this now if I'm out with my wife or kids and like walking through a forest. I'm like, "What did you say?" Yeah, say it again, because I'm so busy concentrating on walking. It's difficult to because I think we're both very fortunate in that we remember what it was like prior. So how easy it is to walk and talk and all this. Now it's so much harder. So I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, the campers in the road. You'd never even think of that, would you, previously? Whereas now you're going, all right, I'm going to fall over to my left. I'm going to fall over in a minute, so I need to lean my body that
Yes.
way, and at this point, it wasn't a case of figuring out how to do it, and all of a sudden I was walking again. It was robotic. I was stiff-legged walking. It was like Frankenstein, walking again, where you're like, well, I can move my leg there, but it is by no means smooth. It's taken me the best part of a decade to get to the point where now 9 times out of 10, touch wood, 9 times out of 10, you wouldn't know that there was anything wrong with me. It's only the people that are close to me that can recognize when something is occurring. Yeah, and you've also obviously got as well the pain side of it. The so when, as I said, when a nerve is stripped down, it's telling you that there's pain, and that was probably one of the hardest things that I had to overcome with the transverse myelitis. I've never felt pain like it. The nerve pain, okay, and it's graphic, but the only way I've been able to try and sort of get somebody to semi appreciate what it feels like is by saying it's like somebody's pouring acid on you, right? And it's burning. It's just an intense burning, and then they're rubbing sandpaper on your legs as well. It's an insane burning. It is like your skin is on fire. That's what they say. The nerves are on fire, and I used to rattle. If you'd have shook me, I'd have rattled with the amount of medication that I was on to try and combat all of these, the pain, the nerve pain, everything else. And obviously that, you take some tablets, you need to take other tablets to counteract those tablets. And, hence why I was taking sleeping tablets, because the tablets that I was taking were keeping me awake, and the nerve pain, it was crazy. But I lost count of the amount of times that, I'd be out walking and then I just go and fall down because, well, one, either I've had a misfire, my nerves have just gone, what? Or, I've just, sharp, intense pain has come out of nowhere and your body just goes,
yes,
just to control the pain. Now, my wife will spot it now when I still get it. I go from talking to just momentarily going in on myself, and for a minute or so just having to hold my breath and fight against the pain myself. Thankfully, that's something that I experience every so often now, as opposed to almost every day, every minute. At the start of it, it was really, really rough. But the good news story from that was, if I take you back, I know I've waffled on, sorry, if I take you back to working in security and being unable to leave that job, I had no choice. I couldn't work. I've never seen a doorman in a wheelchair yet.
2025, we might.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it'd be harder for people to throw me around, so maybe there is a benefit there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was forced to. I couldn't work, so I was like, right, I'm going to use this time to for my benefit. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't the perfect person that was seeing all positive and going to do this. I spent a good few years of myself absolutely mastering Call of Duty.
Yeah,
I got very good.
yeah,
But after a couple of years of wallowing and playing Call of Duty all day long, I decided, right, now's the time. I need to do something to move forward. I looked around universities. I did a significant amount of studying to figure out what I could do. And a friend of ours was had just been to university to become an environmental health officer. And fortunately, they were part time. They were 2.5 days a week, and they had the facilities to accommodate disabled students. They had wheelchair ramps, they had access, they had lifts everywhere. And I was fortunate as well that the sort of grants that I was given, for the disabled learning also included support. So had um, I had a buddy sort of thing, a mentor that came in with me and would take notes for me because at this point, my writing was still very,
yeah.
very slowly. I recorded all my lectures because half the lectures sometimes I would not remember because I'd be morphined out. At this point I was still taking morphine 4 or 5 times a day. I was taking tramadol, gabapentin. I was still shaking. You could still hear rattles. So half the time I go to university and actually all of it. I was there physically. I wasn't there mentally. I was just in a cloud of painkillers. Um, but fortunately, as I said, I had the mentor that would take notes for me. We'd do extra study sessions to make up for it. The lectures were recorded, so I could go back through when I was sort of compos mentis and go through it. And I discovered actually throughout university, for the first time in my life, I love learning. I
Okay.
actually have a thirst for learning. I think maybe your school was just the wrong time for me or something. But yeah, I have a thirst for knowledge. I did really well in university. I came out with a first class with honours somehow, although
Nice.
I'm still semi confident that I mixed up my exam papers with somebody else. Maybe they couldn't read anything. But either way, hopefully they won't recheck it. So, and then I graduated out of university. I came off tramadol. Now, that was probably the second hardest thing I've ever had to do. Morphine was easy for me. It didn't really do anything for the pain either. Generalized pain it did, but the nerve pain it didn't touch. Gabapentin and the other sort of pentins were better for that, but tramadol was good for it. Problem with tramadol is I found my body was significantly more dependent on the tramadol than it was the Oromorph, the morphine. The morphine just stopped. It was fine,
Yeah.
no problem whatsoever. The tramadol, I wasn't addicted. I wasn't addicted to taking it because I would regularly, as I sort of got to the point where I felt more human, I would regularly choose to skip a dose, proving to myself mentally that I'm not reliant on it. You
Yeah.
know, I can choose not to do it. I know it's going to be rough, but I'm telling myself I'm not addicted to it. But obviously, after 4 years of being on maximum dose of tramadol, my body was absolutely dependent on it,
Yes. Yeah.
and stopping that was rough. Um, me and my wife went on our belated honeymoon. So I got weekend release from the neuro rehab unit to go and get married. So,
Okay.
so she had a great start to our wedding because she got to get married and then ship me back off to the rehab unit.
Right.
So we took our belated honeymoon, and at the time, at that time, my wife we'd just discovered on holiday that she was pregnant with our eldest. So she decided to stop caffeine, and she loves a coffee. So
Okay.
she was having caffeine withdrawal, caffeine headaches, and it just so coincided with the fact that I was stopping tramadol as well. So that
Right.
made for an interesting holiday where we were both grumpy buggers, and we were
Yeah.
both, withdrawing from something. But yeah, the tramadol was hard. I've been offered it a few times since, when I've been injured or when something else happened, and I won't take it again now. I understand obviously that there are people that absolutely need to, and maybe at one point in my life I will need to again, but I will do so with caution because that was really, really challenging to come off for me. But I did it, and it's been 5, 6, 7 years since I've had any now.
Was there any sort of special technique you employed to get yourself off, or did you just grizz it out?
I'd love to say that there was, but it was just to tough it out. I think it really helped. I couldn't have done anything that I've done over the last 15 years without my wife. I really can't. She's been an absolute rock star to me. But knowing that she knew what it was, and knowing that I knew why I was behaving in a way, So the thing that affected me the most was anger. I was really angry coming off it, for no reason. You couldn't. I couldn't go to the cinema, for example, and it cheer me up. Or I couldn't read a book and feel happier. I was just angry. I was just angry all of the time coming off it. But it helped to. I knew what that was. I knew it wasn't me. I knew it was the medication. I knew it was a short-term thing. I just needed to ride it out. Seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and knowing that, this isn't me and this isn't forever, that sort of helped, I guess, rationalize it for me and helped me be able to actually choose to keep on reducing the doses until I got to the point where I wasn't taking any anymore.
So you're completely off of all of that stuff now?
Yes, I am reluctant to take anything now. Paracetamol, ibuprofen, I'll take, but I don't take anything else whatsoever now. It was a long process. My goal was to get back to, well, I'll never get back to who I was, but my goal was to get back to more normal. I know that's horrible, but to get back to more normal for the birth of my eldest. So, there was a lot of work, and I think, my background in sport and stuff helped. There was a lot of work on me progressing, keeping, I was pushing the boundaries, I was fighting it against, making that progress. So, for example, I was spending most of my time in a wheelchair, when my eldest, when we knew that we were pregnant with my eldest, then, I managed to progress to just using a Zimmer frame. And then it was walking sticks, and then it was crutches, and then it was one walking stick, and gradually progressed over 4 or 5 years until I got to the point where I was walking unaided. It was still a little bit wobbly, I'd still sort of veer off occasionally.
Yeah.
But I still do that now. I can be walking along, and out of nowhere, my left leg just stops. It just goes nope, and you just go oh, I know I'm going. Somebody shouts timber behind me, and I just go over like a felled tree. But I got to where I wanted to be, to where I felt like I was able to, be a normal parent for my eldest, and I've continued to, I guess, to try and push since then.
When I know you said earlier about people in your situation, they're blocked into thirds, right? So some are making recovery, some will be like it forever, some sadly won't make it. When you were going through all of this, did you find anybody who had been or was going through it and reach out to them for any sort of mentoring or support?
No, I didn't have a mentor. I didn't really have any individual that I could lean on, because it was so rare. The MS Society was good in, the leaflets that they generated, the website that they sort of kept up to date and stuff. One thing that I did struggle with was, in theory, people with MS are, most of them, I believe anyway, will have reoccurrence. Obviously, there's different types of MS, but MS is known that it's more likely to reoccur. So you have relapses. Transverse myelitis, in theory, is not supposed to have any. 6 to 9 months after my initial diagnosis, I did relapse and ended up back in hospital on another drip of steroids and stuff. But I always like to be unique, so I just put it down to that. But no, there wasn't, and that gave me a bit of a boost at the time, because I threw myself into trying to educate people and trying to provide a bit of support. I started I think it was a Twitter page or Twitter group or whatever it's called now, X, isn't it? I started a Twitter page, designed to sort of educate and promote and also support people that were going through something similar. And that did get to a point where I think we had over 1,000 people following it and interacting with it at times, and that was good. That made me feel good, because I felt like I was doing a little bit of good for other people. The downside, though, of that, I think, was as I was recovering and focusing more on sort of putting that phase of my life behind me, I was tied into it. By focusing on it and by trying to educate people, reading into it and offering all of that advice, it was actually pulling me back. It was keeping me in that mentality of I suffer with transverse myelitis. So I ended up stopping it. I ended up stopping pasting and stopping posting. Sorry. And yeah, I guess right in that phase of my life, right, I'm on to phase 3 now. But no, there wasn't really a lot of support out there at all, because it was so rare. I started to try and do some of it myself, but felt myself being pulled back into focusing on the transverse myelitis and not moving forward, which I guess is my drive is always moving forward, trying to always take a step, keep progressing, moving forwards, which I guess took me to phase 3.
Okay.
It sound like a Marvel franchise soon, aren't I?
The multiverse.
The multiverse, yeah. So that's when I started, I guess, my first career, as opposed to sports. I joined a company as a safety consultant, which, interestingly, I started university, and if I apologise if my lecturer ever sees this, if you ever ask my wife the bit of the university that I didn't like, it was safety. I just found it boring. I hated it, and it was legislation focused, and that's like trying to read Spanish. It just doesn't. It's not written, for modern English. And I found over the course of the sort of last year, I actually started to quite enjoy the legislation side of it. Once something ticked, and I actually started to be able to understand what was going on, I quite enjoyed it. So I joined a firm as a safety consultant and did that for a year before being asked to come and interview for Amazon. So I joined Amazon as a safety specialist, which was the sort of the entry-level management entry-level manager position at Amazon, working in the fulfillment centre in Manchester, known as Man 1. I think it's technically Altrincham, which is right near the airport. I started there, and within 6 months, had been asked to take on the safety manager's position. And that essentially left me leading the fulfillment centre's safety efforts with around, I think at peak time we had around 3,000 associates there, so ensuring end-to-end, the safety of everybody that worked in that facility. Fast forward another 12, 18 months, I took on a regional safety manager's role, looking after four facilities. So I looked after what we used to call the AR facilities, so the Amazon robotics, so the high tech ones that had robots moving to people instead of people moving to shelving. We had more conveyors in Man 1 in Manchester. We had more conveyors in Manchester Airport, and that's a sight to see when you first go in there. So I worked in safety for around 2.5, 3 years before I guess I realised that I was ready for another challenge. So I moved into more of a sort of a core operations role. I moved over to a team called Ship with Amazon. It's now called Amazon Shipping, but I was one of the sort of the first group to join the operations side. And it was a definite trial by fire first year. I was asked to join and become what was called their peak captain. So the peak captain is responsible for creating the operational plan. Obviously, over peak, you come near Christmas, November, December time, the volume of orders, skyrockets.
Yeah.
And you've got static facilities. You've got a set number of drivers and a set number of associates. So you can't accommodate that huge drive in volume with the normal workforce and normal facilities. So I had to create the operational plan that would make our forecasted volume, which was up here versus our day-to-day volume, make it achievable. And that was really, really enjoyable and really good for me developmentally as well, because I think more than anything potentially focused me on thinking outside the box, approaching problems differently, because there was an infinite amount of problems, from certain packages that were wrapped in a way that the box was more circular than round, and on the conveyors it would just continue to roll and they'd never actually get processed, to the split of volume that we sent to Royal Mail versus we handled ourselves, all the way to opening sort of pop-up shops within other facilities to allow us to process that volume as well. There was a lot of problems to solve, and the Amazon has a backwards working mentality, right? So it means work backwards from the problem. So we know what we're trying to achieve. Now we just need to spot all of the gaps, and then we need to plug them. So we would go from, for example, 300,000 shipments a week to, I think it was 720,000 shipments a week at peak was our estimate. And we needed to, that's where we are, that's where we need to get to. Go on then, Matt, it's your job to make sure that we get to that, and we can. So I did that for the first 9 months I was there. The peak captain role is a hugely demanding role. So it's not a role it's not a static role. It doesn't belong to one person and that's it. Each year, somebody will be given the opportunity to go in and operate as the peak captain and sort of be pulled away from their existing role to go and support that role for a while. So that opened up my horizons to more of the workings of Amazon and more of the operational challenges and opportunities as well, I guess. And that was sort of my first real foray into logistics, which obviously is where I'm finding my career now. From there, I led our cost optimization program. So essentially, we were a startup. Amazon isn't a startup anymore, but within Amazon, there's hundreds of startups. So the Ship with Amazon, the Amazon shipping team was operating as a startup. So it was a case of demonstrating that this product was something that people wanted. Once we got to the point where we know this is a service that people like and this is a service that people want, then it's about making the efficiencies to make it operationally viable. We actually need to be making money now. We need to be trimming the fat, making the processes run smooth, and making sure that the operation is as efficient running as it can do. So I spent 12 months on that project as well. I think over that 12-month period, we generated over $21 million in savings. So nice. It was a really, really positive year, the first year for that team. And then I was asked to take on a different team, which had again just being created, which was the network development team. So I took that role a few months before COVID hit, which was bad timing, because the network development team was responsible for Amazon's middle mile. So you move in between fulfillment center and fulfillment center, or fulfillment center and delivery center, not a delivery to a customer, but also not an inward delivery into Amazon. It was Amazon to Amazon, middle mile. So the blue trailers that you see now with the koi smile on it. we were responsible for planning, for designing the network that ran all of these trailers to and from Amazon sites. And then COVID hit, and countries started locking down. Countries started locking down certain zones, certain districts, and even to the point where there was a set district in Germany that was shut on a Sunday between certain hours for trucks over a certain size. If you think about, let's say we would operate 100,000 lanes, over any one year. Then COVID hit, we had 100,000 lanes to change because everybody changed. Each country had a different rule for what they would or wouldn't allow.
Right.
But it also wasn't static. So one week, the German ministry would say that they're not allowing trucks over 7.5 ton to pass through a district at a certain time. You go, how do I? Well, I need to connect the shipment from here that needs to come into the UK at this time. How am I now going to do that? Do I stop it at the border and wait for that exclusion zone to pass? Do I divert it around? Do we fly it instead, or put it on the sea, move it across? It was a real logistical challenge into making sure that everybody's parcels kept going, because at this point, Amazon's next day delivery was not a newfound thing. It was a core staple. You order on Amazon, you'll get it next day.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. We couldn't take our time. We couldn't be like, we'll just pause it there and we'll bring it across. We had to find solutions to bring the product over on time.
Yeah.
And Amazon is fanatical about data, and the data that Amazon goes into is to the minutest of details. If you had a truck arriving 30 seconds after it should have done, that's not okay. Because that 30-second delay is probably 30 shipments that can't get on the truck for it to be departed to meet its next journey onward. So the network development team absolutely loved doing that. We grew that from 4 to over 30 people. When I left, obviously the roles had expanded, and we demonstrated the value that this team had in continuing to deliver and improve Amazon's next day offering. So I like to tell myself today that when I order something, I had a part to play in it here next day.
Yeah.
I also, though, I do ignore the fact when it doesn't arrive on time. That's not me.
It's not your fault. No.
I didn't do that one. Yeah.
No.
So and then I also, during that time, I became what's known as the bar raiser at Amazon.
Okay.
So the bar raiser program was, not so much is anymore, one of the reasons I left Amazon, but it was an incredibly important part of hiring at Amazon. So the principle behind a bar raiser is when you hire to come into Amazon as a junior manager or above, you have to go through panels. You go through an interview with at least 4 people separately. One of those must be a bar raiser. And a bar raiser is nothing to do with the position that they're being hired for. Okay, so let's say that you, Mark, you're trying to hire a project manager underneath you. I'm a bar raiser and I work in sales. I have nothing to do with your product manager role, but I technically have responsibility for approving or rejecting the hire of that candidate that you want. Okay, and what it's designed to do is, one, there's a severe increase in training for becoming a bar raiser. I think when I left, there was around about 2,000 people out of 1.6 million. So not many people are bar raisers whatsoever. The training, it's important training that they do, and they have to demonstrate that they know what they're doing before you actually are allowed to go and act as a bar raiser. And ultimately, my job then as a bar raiser was to show you why this person was or wasn't the right person for the role by listening to all 4 interviewers' feedbacks and asking probing questions and making sure that we're going the right way with non-emotion. You might rightly go, I really need somebody though, I need this person in, and ignore some of the red flags that we see because you really need somebody in now. But actually, we know that will cause you a lot more pain down the road. So you don't want to be doing that, and the bar raiser is supposed to try and facilitate the right decision. And I got involved with hiring our heroes and some of the other aspects of Amazon that there's a really positive side of them where they encourage a lot of veterans to come in and join Amazon. And I got invited as a bar raiser to attend a lot of those interviews, which is where I spent a significant amount of my bar raiser training. I really enjoyed interviewing veterans. I fully understand. Well, no, I don't fully understand. I fully comprehend the attractiveness of hiring a vet, and the skill set that they bring. So I was a real big advocate for that. I took part in days where we'd invite in a lot of either newly released or upcoming released veterans, and I guess my job I set myself on that day anyway is trying to overcome some of the reservations that a lot of them had. What I perceive in some of the veterans that I've come across anyway is that they don't quite understand just how valuable they are. They undervalue themselves. They don't appreciate just how much their leadership experience brings. You might have not been logistics in the army or in the Marines or something else, but skills are transferable. Core skills are transferable. I fully believe that if you have a good set of core skills, there's no role that you can't do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've hired, I can't count the amount of the veterans that I've hired into my team personally, as well as just into Amazon, and they are standout, the best people I've hired, and would do so again. I'm actually in the process of trying to pinch a couple of them back to join me in my logistics company that I'm setting up, or that I have set up. I'm trying to pinch them and bring them back over because I see exactly the value that they bring. And that was a real big enjoyment. Sorry.
I do a lot of work in this area myself. Having been a civilian now for 15 years, I've actually got a call Thursday night with a bunch of veterans to try and explain this exact thing to them, to let them understand their value. I've got a project going on to do with people leaving the military, and part of it is that. It's trying to understand the value that they bring to the civilian world and the workplace. So many of them, and you've already said this, but so many of them don't understand that their skills and their experiences are transferable in this little silly things that you just do when in the military. Like, you turn up on time and you're well presented. To you, that's normal. And I've realized in the civilian world, it's not always normal. People turn up an hour late for things and don't even apologize. So yeah, no, I absolutely get what you mean, what you're saying. There was this whole narrative back in the day, and it's one I've tried to crush a little bit, is that all veterans are either mad, bad, or sad. They just think that when you see a veteran, he or she is going to have some sort of mental health issues and they're going to be a problem. It's the complete opposite of that, And as you've just said, and it's refreshing to hear that in your company now, you're actively looking to hire veterans. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I think the main difference is self-promotion, right? Unless you count the 2 weeks work experience I did when I was 14, I've never served. Self-promotion is absolute paramount in corporate world, in corporate mentality. You don't get recognized, you don't get promoted, you don't get opportunities unless you can self-promote and show the value that you bring. In the services, you're not encouraged to self-promote. You're encouraged to stay quiet and do what you're told.
Yeah, right? Be humble, do your job.
And that has value in itself, and that's, well, certainly, it serves its purpose in the military, but that's one of the big hurdles I feel like veterans need to challenge themselves on, is to stop seeing that limit and actually start self-promoting. You need to critically analyze some of the things that you have achieved. It doesn't even need to be up here, but like, if you've achieved something, if you've done something that you set out to do, or somebody set out for you to do it, then that's something that should or can be recognized against, and that should be promoted against. The vets that I've hired in, and some of them I've hired in directly from the military as well, that was one of the big, development pieces that I try to work on them with, is actually, it feels like a little bit of bragging to start with. It's quite uncomfortable, but if you don't show people the value you're bringing, they won't see it.
Yeah.
And that does have limiting factors. And the same goes for job interviews. If you are reserved in showing off what you can bring, then people won't see it. You've got to put it on in black and white on paper in front of somebody and say, this is what I'm good at, and this is why I'm good at it, and this is how I can transfer it across to, to corporate world or to, the civilian world. I think if I, a failed triathlete who went to uni late and studied safety and then moved on to logistics, if I can adapt and sort of work in all four of those,
Right.
then absolutely people in the military can, because the triathlon had transferable skills to take to uni, which had transferable skills to lead in safety, which had transferable skills to move into logistics and operations. Like, they are four vastly different areas, but it's the skills behind them that are important, not the experience or not the demonstrable, results that you can show that have to be directly related.
Agreed. So what's what we're on phase 4 now? Is
Something like that. I'm not sure.
that modern day, current day?
Yeah. So modern. Yeah. Okay. So let's say phase 4 is modern, current day. So I am happily married. Next month, 13 years we've been married.
Nice.
So she could have easily been out on parole by now, but she's regretting that, I'm sure. 2 kids, one that's turning 9 next week, and a 6-year-old, 2 little boys. Well, I say little, they're not, but the reason I like getting up in the morning, they really are. I think until you've had kids, you don't quite realise, if you want kids, actually. If you don't want kids, don't have kids. Until you have kids, you don't quite realise just how much purpose they give you. I've said my sort of mentality to life is drive. Move forward a step at a time and keep progressing. And a main driver for that is the kids. I want to be able to provide for them, but also to be a good role model to them, to show them that work hard, respect people, treat how you want to be treated, but more than anything, enjoy yourself in life, as well, and just be thankful for every day. So yeah, happy living on the Wirral still. I've been I created my own logistics company called TLF Logistics a couple of years ago, and that is focused on consulting in the logistics industry. So I've got a major project ongoing at the minute with some big retail names to roll out some large-scale changes to their logistics network. Alongside that, we also operate our own fleet of trucks, HGVs, vans, etc. And we are rapidly going after expansion this year, hence the plug for looking at hiring veterans again. So it's an exciting time. First time in my life I'm self-employed, and excited to sort of go after it and build something myself. The frustration that sometimes I've felt in not being the one that's able to make the decision at a company. At Amazon, I was a small part of a big machine. At my last job, I was a bigger part of a smaller machine. But you're answerable to somebody, and somebody can overrule a direction that you want to go in, for example. Whereas, the leadership experience that I've got and the skills and I guess just the knowledge that I've got really in logistics, alongside wanting to be able to build something myself where I can surround myself with good people, was too attractive an opportunity to put off. So really this year jumped in with 2 feet to back myself. I know that I will deliver what I set out to deliver, and hopefully start to make waves in the logistics industry. We'll hopefully see TLF Logistics grow. And there's a little plug there as well with, or there's a little nod to my kids there. So obviously my surname is Fisher, and me and my wife have always called our kids our little fish. So TLF is two little fish. It's just a little nod to the kids that when they see a truck with our name on it, it's to them. Which again, I'm a very family orientated person. So it's just a little nod to them. But yeah, life is looking up. It's looking exciting. Just excited to continue and see what each day brings. My sort of mentality is try and enjoy each day.
Yeah.
Without sounding negative, you don't know what the next day will look like. You don't know what will happen tomorrow. I've seen that in my life. You make plans as far out as you want to, but if the universe is going to change your course, you've got to be adaptable to it.
Absolutely.
Just attack each day with tenacity and try and enjoy it.
Absolutely. Well, I travel a lot around this country, constantly in a car, half man, half Ford. So I'll keep an eye out for your lorries. Hopefully, I'll see one. I'll get someone to give me the old when I'm driving past. But mate, it's some story. Thank you for sharing it. I really, really appreciate it. My aim, like I said at the beginning, is to share people's stories because I understand the value that they have, and the internet is a vast place, and this little conversation we had could reach some far-flung corner of a place somewhere we've never heard of, and it could help one person, and that's great. So, I know you're busy because I've just spent an hour and a half talking to you, and I see everything you got going on with the kids and the company and everything. So thank you. I appreciate your time, Matt. Thank you for giving it up for me today.
I appreciate you having me on as well. The only point, I guess, like you said, hopefully people will hear this podcast and potentially in some ways will resonate with them. The only point that I haven't actually mentioned at all that I absolutely should have done, certainly given that it was Blue Monday yesterday or the day before, absolutely wouldn't be who I am today without the support of other people. As much as I like to tell myself today that I'm a tenacious sort of person that can get through anything. I wouldn't have done it without the support network I've got. That's my wife, my family, but also the complete strangers that have helped me. The counsellors I've seen, the psychiatrists I've seen, the psychotherapists. I think I'd be collecting medals for every different type of therapist I've seen. But the support and the help that you can get from people like that have been absolutely profound. And I wouldn't be the person I am today without that. And the hardest step is the first one, to acknowledge that you need it and to reach out to it. But from there, it's all up. From there, there's up the support that you get from somebody just talking has helped me phenomenally. Throughout the years with everything that's gone on with me. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder from the transverse myelitis, which I didn't realise was a thing that you could get unless you've been, in active combat and something. But the way that they explained it to me was, you woke up one day and you've been this person, you woke up the next day and you've been somebody completely different that you don't recognise, and that's been traumatic, and you've had to deal with that and process that. So yeah, from that to the multitude of other support I've got, I think the one thing that I could implore would be to people to seek help when you need it and reach out to others, strangers, family, professionals, anybody, everybody. They all have a part to play in helping people. Equally, I'm more than happy to continue doing that. I do that currently. It's one of the things that I'm proud of, that I'll always carve out time to help people.
Awesome. Well, you're preaching to the converted, because I spread that same message as far and as wide as I can. And it's one of the reasons that I live the way that I live, as a nod of thanks and respect to those people that have in the past, continue to now, and will in the future help me when I reach out and ask for it. But speaking of the future, Matt, I wish you all the very best with the future. I will keep an eye out for your wagons. We'll stay in touch. I'm sure we're connected on social media, and now we've done this, we've got that deeper level of connection. So we'll stay in touch. I'll be keeping an eye on everything you do. If there's anything I can do in the future to help, let me know. And then when you become a billionaire with the world's biggest logistics company in Plymouth, in the UK. Don't forget about me in Plymouth.
Deal.